I'm going to try to condense, I'm going to give a presentation that I gave at Midwest back in March. It was a 30-minute presentation, and I'm going to condense it down into 15 minutes. So hold on tight. Here we go. All right, so first, just to give some background information, the absorption and metabolism of vitamin D, right? Whether you consume vitamin D, typically found in two forms, vitamin D2 or vitamin D3. In the livestock industry, we're typically going to supplement synthetically produced vitamin D3, but whether you consume vitamin D or whether you produce it endogenously through skin exposure to UVB rays, that product's going to enter the system. It's going to be hydroxylized in the liver and converted to 25-hydroxy-D. And typically, when we measure vitamin D status, we're measuring the status of exposure, right? We're measuring that circulating 25-hydroxy-D concentration. And the reason that we focus on that metabolite is because it's got a much longer half-life than the biologically active metabolite 1,25-dihydroxy, which undergoes a second hydroxylation in the kidney. And that's actually the active form of the vitamin. But when we measure and look at vitamin status, we're going to measure the circulating metabolite. So, as I mentioned, most of the livestock industry supplements vitamin D3 as a form of vitamin D, but DSM is producing a synthetically manufactured 25-hydroxy-D3 product, and it's labeled high D. And the believed benefits of 25-hydroxy-D3 compared to supplementing vitamin D3 itself is that it's more efficiently absorbed, and it enters the circulation sooner because the vitamin D binding protein has a higher affinity for 25-hydroxy-D compared to vitamin D3 itself. And also it requires one less step of metabolism in that liver hydroxylation step, and it's not the form that's stored in fat. So just to give a brief review on what 1 international unit of vitamin D is. 1 international unit is also equivalent to 0.025 micrograms of cholecalciferol. And when we think about high D or 25-hydroxy-D3 compared to vitamin D3, we're typically going to discuss them by the same international unit. So 1 international unit of 25-hydroxy-D3 is the same as 1 international unit of vitamin D3 by definition. Now, there's some research here in the last 6 years that's looked at supplementing 25-hydroxy-D3 in swine compared to vitamin D3 itself. And what all those studies have shown is you do see an increase in serum 25-hydroxy-D3 concentrations. Right? That makes sense. We're adding that metabolite directly into the diet rather than that animal metabolizing it from the D3 source. There have been some differences in performance criteria. And across all of these studies, there's quite a bit of variability just in experimental design, in the way that vitamin D was supplemented to the animal. There's also some positive impacts that have been reported on bone status markers. And then Elizabeth here, who's up at the front, when she was at Texas Tech, what was that? How long ago has that been, Elizabeth? 4 or 5 years? 5? She did some work at Texas Tech looking at 25-hydroxy-D3's effect on muscle fiber development in the fetal pig and saw positive benefits there. So quite a bit of information, but makes it a little hard to interpret all those different results based on the differences in experimental designs. And so really the questions that we had, and part of my PhD was to kind of understand if we see these the improvements or the benefits from in vitamin status of the animal by feeding or supplementing 25-hydroxy-D3, does that cause improved performance? We seem to have a little bit of a mixed bag across studies. If we increase vitamin D3 supplementation, can we elicit the same response, right? If it's kind of the way I think about this, and maybe it's not the right way, but if we think about vitamin E supplementing synthetic versus natural vitamin E, if we want to get the status of the animal up, we can still do it by feeding more synthetic vitamin E. What level of vitamin D3 is needed to elicit a similar serum 25-hydroxy-D3 response as supplementing 2,000 international units of 25-hydroxy-D3 itself? And then if supplemental vitamin D influences fetal muscle development, like Elizabeth's work showed, can it lead to postnatal growth alterations? And the first question I'm going to kind of answer is this third question here. We did a study in early 2014. Seems like a lifetime ago, but I dedicated about 2 years to this project. So, but what we did in this project was we actually measured the serum 25-hydroxy-D3 response when we titrated feeding concentrations of vitamin D3 into the gestating sow. And we used that information to develop a prediction equation to estimate the concentration of vitamin D3 that we needed to feed to achieve a serum concentration similar to those elicited in published data where they supplemented 2,000 international units of 25-hydroxy-D3. So I'm going to skip through this, but essentially we fed it for 30 days, and we fed those sows once daily with 2.5 kilograms of feed. We use SAS to run the stats. Looking at the graph, across the x-axis, we've got our dietary vitamin D3 concentrations. We fed 7 levels from 200 international units per kilogram of feed all the way up to 25,600 international units per kilogram of feed. Our purple bars represent day 0 or prior to the feed treatments, serum 25-hydroxy-D3 concentrations, and the green bars represent 30 days post-feeding treatments. And what we observed was that after feeding those titrated vitamin D3 concentrations for 30 days, we saw a quadratic increase in serum 25-hydroxy-D3. We then took that information that we generated from the titration and we developed a prediction equation looking at the supplemental vitamin D3 concentrations per day and its expected or predicted serum 25-hydroxy-D3 concentration. We had a fairly strong correlation there. We actually used the Bayesian information criterion to select that quadratic trend, but I always think most people understand R squared values more than BIC values. But it had a pretty strong fit. So in conclusion from that first study, we saw that increasing supplementation of dietary vitamin D3 increased serum 25-hydroxy-D3 in the gestating sow in a quadratic manner. If you look back to the published data, some work by Weber and others in 2014 found that supplementing sows 2,000 international units of 25-hydroxy-D3 had elicited serum responses between 50 and 90 nanograms per mil. So what we wanted to do was to try to fit and match that serum response that was reported in sows fed high D by feeding vitamin D3 itself. So how can we try to get to that same serum concentration or circulating concentration? So what we did was we actually supplemented 9,600 international units per kilogram or 24,000 international units per day of vitamin D3 in order to try to elicit a response of 80 nanograms per milliliter in that gestating sow. And this will kind of lead into the subsequent study that we did. Okay, this study was conducted from April to December of 2014. In this study, we used 112 sows. After breeding, we assigned them to one of 4 dietary vitamin D treatments, receiving either low, medium, or high concentrations of vitamin D3. Our low concentration would be the 2012 NRC recommendation. The medium would be 2,000 international units per kilogram, and the high, which was what we derived from the previous experiment. Or we fed 2,000 international units of 25-hydroxy-D3. We fed those treatments throughout gestation and lactation. Again, we fed once daily, 2.5 kilograms per day, and we measured sow serum 25-hydroxy-D3 concentration, and we also measured it in the lactating pigs, and then we also measured sow performance and feed intake. So briefly moving into the results, take a second to set these up. So we have our 3 vitamin D3 concentrations in the feed, 800, 2,000, or 9,600. And then the red line represents the 2,000 international units of 25-hydroxy-D3. And what we found was that on day 100 in gestation, we had I haven't looked at these stats in a while, so let me get this right. We had a linear increase in serum 25-hydroxy-D3 as we increased vitamin D3 in the diet. We also saw that pigs fed 2,000 international units of vitamin D3 had lower serum 25-hydroxy-D3 compared to those fed the same international units of 25-hydroxy-D3. But when we fed that high concentration of D3, we actually had a higher serum response than feeding the 25-hydroxy-D3 by itself. Now, if you remember from the previous study, we were looking to try to target 80 nanograms per mil with our vitamin D3 concentration. We got pretty close. But what we found was that those pigs fed, or those sows fed high D actually didn't have quite as high of the serum response as we had anticipated. At farrowing, we saw similar responses, and then again at weaning, we saw higher concentrations, but those were when those sows were ad lib fed. If we look at the serum 25-hydroxy-D3 concentrations of the lactating pig, at birth, what we observed was a linear increase in piglet serum 25-hydroxy-D3 with increasing vitamin D3 concentrations. And again, what we found was that pigs fed 25-hydroxy-D3 had increased concentrations compared to those fed 2,000 international units of D3, but lower than pigs from sows fed 9,600 international units of vitamin D3. And what we thought was interesting was then when you measured serum concentrations again at weaning, what we found was that there really was not much of a difference in the pigs born from sows fed 2,000 international units of D3 or 25-hydroxy-D3. So from that, you can extrapolate, or you can kind of see that there's not much 25-hydroxy-D3 concentration or transfer in milk. And so that's why we see similar concentrations regardless of the source at weaning. But again, what we see is that we fed high levels of D3, we really had high concentrations of 25-hydroxy-D3. So I'm not gonna go through the performance numbers, but kind of in summary of this portion of the experiments, maternal vitamin D regimen altered serum 25-hydroxy-D3 in the sows and the pre-weaned pig. Those differences in serum 25-hydroxy-D3 of pigs at weaning suggest that milk vitamin D transfer is more dependent on the level of the vitamin rather than the form, kind of as I mentioned before. And maternal vitamin D regimen did not impact the maternal performance, neonatal bone ash, muscle fiber numbers, or pre-weaned pig growth in this study. So then what we did, we got really brave and wise, and we thought, hey, this is a great idea if we follow these weaned pigs, or a subsample of these weaned pigs, all the way to market. In case we had a type 2 error in our maternal performance measurements and our fiber measurement, muscle fiber measurements of those weaned pigs, let's just follow those pigs all the way to market and see if we do impact postnatal development in those animals. And if you notice, there's so in May of 2015, May last year, I threw a big party because I was finally finished with this long project that started a year and a half before. But the objectives, we really wanted to determine whether maternal vitamin D and nursery vitamin D regimens influence that post-weaning growth performance. We used a total of 448 pigs that were weaned from 2 of the 4 of the 4 sow groups that were used in the maternal portion of the study. And we used them in a split plot design where we looked at the maternal and nursery vitamin D regimens. Our nursery vitamin D regimens were assigned at weaning, and those pigs went on to one of 2 nursery treatments, receiving either 2,000 international units of vitamin D3 or 2,000 international units of 25-hydroxy-D3 in the diet. They received those same treatments in 3 consecutive nursery phases until 35 days post-weaning. So I'm going to go through the growth performance of those pigs, but we did not see a nursery vitamin D treatment impact on post-weaning performance. So I'm not going to present that today, but what we did see were some interesting differences in pigs born from sows fed different maternal vitamin D treatments. And what we found was that as we increased vitamin D3, we saw a quadratic increase in average daily gain in those pigs in the nursery, and again in finishing. And we also saw that in the nursery we had a quadratic increase in average daily feed intake, and a quadratic improvement in feed efficiency and finishing. So overall, what we saw was that as we increased vitamin D3 in the diet, pigs fed from sows fed 2,000 international units had the best nursery finishing performance and the heaviest carcass weights at market. And what we found was that those pigs fed 2,000 international units of 25-hydroxy-D3 performed similarly. This is a pretty busy slide, but this is again looking at serum 25-hydroxy-D3 concentrations in those pigs after weaning. We measured weaning, 17 days post-weaning, day 35, which was the end of the nursery treatments, and then again on day 70 in finishing. And again, what we found was that as far as nursery treatments at weaning, when we fed either vitamin D3 or 25-hydroxy-D3, pigs fed 25-hydroxy-D3 had higher serum 25-hydroxy-D3 concentrations post-weaning, but then by day 70 or 35 days after the end of the nursery treatments, serum responses or serum levels were similar again, which makes sense. We typically see somewhere between a 10-day and 2-week half-life of 25-hydroxy-D3. And if we look at the maternal treatments, again, these would be similar. These would be the same as those pigs at weaning. We had a linear increase in serum 25-hydroxy-D3 based on increasing maternal vitamin D3 supplementation. And then over time, we saw those maternal treatments start to dwindle. So in conclusion, maternal and nursery vitamin D regimens influenced 25-hydroxy-D3 of the growing pig until common diets were fed. Pigs fed from sows fed 2,000 international units of vitamin D3 had increased gain and feed intake in the nursery, and increased gain and feed efficiency in finishing compared to those fed 800 or 9,600 international units of D3. The one thing that we did see that I didn't discuss, but we did see some increases in lactation feed intake for those sows fed 2,000 international units of vitamin D3. We think that may have resulted in potentially some heavier, what we saw was numerically increased weaning weights of pigs weaned from those sows. And then finally, pigs from sows fed 9,600 international units of vitamin D3 had lighter final body weights. They also had lighter carcass weights compared to pigs from sows fed 25-hydroxy-D3 by itself. So overall, what our conclusions were, our work actually disagreed with what Elizabeth did in the sense that we did not see any improvements in fetal muscle fiber numbers or a change in fetal muscle fiber characteristics. We did find that for milk transfer of the vitamin, the level was more impactful than the form of the vitamin itself. And the current results suggest that maternal supplementation of vitamin D at 2,000 international units per kilogram provided the most benefit from a growth and performance standpoint, whether it was D3 or 25-hydroxy-D3. But if we want to measure or target or look at serum 25-hydroxy-D3, it's much more sensitive from supplementation of 25-hydroxy-D3 itself. Makes sense, right?